The storm had rolled in without warning. One moment, the sky above the Nevada desert shimmered with that golden haze of late afternoon, and the next, it cracked open with thunder like a snapped bone. Elon had never trusted GPS completely, but on this particular stretch of rural highway, it was all he had. His assistant had insisted he take the back route, a quieter road with a view, a way to clear his head before the conference in Reno. But now, with the windshield wipers struggling to keep up and cell service reduced to a cruel tease of one flickering bar, the serene detour had become a detour in every sense. The road bent sharply, disappeared behind a dense wall of pine, then spilled him out into something entirely unexpected, a town. Not just any town either. It was the kind of place that looked like it had been dipped in nostalgia and set aside for someone to find by accident. Wooden signs, storefronts with hand-painted windows, a rusted clock tower that ticked like it had nowhere else to be. Elon blinked, briefly wondering if he'd slipped through a fold in time. The car sputtered as he pulled up to what looked like the town square, then died with a cough. He tried the ignition again, nothing. For a man used to silence in electric vehicles, the mechanical stutter felt prehistoric. Rain streaked the glass, turning everything outside into an oil painting. And for the first time in what felt like years, Elon Musk was stuck. He stepped out, pulling his coat tight against the rain, and looked around. The place felt untouched by modern rush, like a memory. There was a diner with an old neon sign that flickered weakly in the window, a hardware store with tools he hadn't seen since childhood, and a general store that looked like it sold both candy and secrets. No Teslas, no security detail, no one rushing to pitch the next big thing. Just a quiet kind of presence, the kind that seemed to ask, "Who are you without the noise?" He walked toward the diner, unsure what he was expecting. Maybe coffee, maybe directions, maybe a miracle. The bell above the door rang as he entered, and the warm air hit him like a soft blanket. Inside, a jukebox hummed something old and aching in the corner, and a woman behind the counter looked up from a crossword, her eyes narrowing with curiosity, not recognition. "You're soaked," she said matter-of-factly. "Sit. I'll get you a towel." Elon hesitated. No one had ever told him to sit like that. Not in years. He obeyed, not because he had to, but because the tone felt like something you don't argue with, like thunder or grief. The woman returned with a towel and a cup of coffee, setting both down with practiced grace. Her name tag read Margot. "You're not from around here," she said, not asking. "No," Elon replied, drying his hair with the towel. "Car trouble." "That car?" she asked, tilting her head toward the window. "Looks fancy." "Usually is." Margot gave a small smile but didn't press. She went back to the counter, leaving him with the bitter warmth of the coffee and a silence he hadn't known he'd missed. People came and went, a couple of old men in flannel, a young boy dripping wet and holding a fishing rod too big for him, a woman with a dog under her coat. No one seemed to recognize him. Or if they did, they didn't care. It was grounding. Eventually, a man in overalls walked over. He looked about 60, with grease on his hands and something gentle in his eyes. "Name's Harold," he said. "I fix things. Margot says your car's dead." "Yeah, it just stopped." "Let's take a look." Elon followed him back out into the rain, Harold holding a worn canvas umbrella over them both. It had Winston's Auto and Odd Jobs stenciled on it, the kind of umbrella that had seen a lot and still opened. As Harold popped the hood, he whistled low. "Well, I'll be. This is one of those space cars, isn't it?" "Sort of." "I'll see what I can do. Might take a bit. You got somewhere to stay?" Elon hesitated. "I didn't plan on stopping." Harold nodded. "Didn't figure you did. Folks rarely plan on Mapleton." "Mapleton. That's us. Welcome." There was no sarcasm in his tone. No awe either. Just sincerity. Mapleton. The name settled over Elon like the rain. He looked around again, the small shops, the quiet streets, the way everyone moved at a rhythm so unlike the world he knew. Slower, kinder maybe, or at least less transactional. "You can stay at Mrs. Lorne's place," Harold added. "She's got a room upstairs. Runs a little bed and breakfast." emphasis on the little. "I'll take you over there after I tow your car." Something inside Elon stirred, a strange twinge he couldn't name. Not fear, not discomfort, maybe curiosity, maybe the sense that for once the script had flipped. That Elon hesitated before stepping out of the car. The rain had slowed to a whispering drizzle, and the scent of wet earth clung to the air like a memory trying not to fade. He tucked the folded paper into his jacket and glanced around. There were no flashing cameras, no murmurs of recognition, just the sound of a distant dog barking and the faint creak of a screen door somewhere. It was oddly comforting. Across the street, a small general store sat nestled between an antique shop and a boarded-up bakery. Its wooden sign swung lazily in the breeze, letters worn but legible. Marla's Market, since 1952. Elon made his way across, boots crunching against the gravel, and opened the door to the faint jingle of a brass bell. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and dust. Shelves were lined with pickled vegetables, hand-labeled jams, and old glass soda bottles. Behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair tied in a loose bun looked up from a crossword puzzle. Her eyes squinted for a second, not in recognition, but in curiosity, like she was trying to remember if she'd met him in church or seen him at the town fair. "You're not from around here," she said without malice, just observation. "No, ma'am," Elon replied, offering a small, almost sheepish smile. "I got a little off track." "Off track," she repeated with a chuckle, reaching below the counter for a mug. "Son, you're about 30 miles past track. Coffee?" He nodded, and she poured from a thermos into a chipped ceramic mug with a faded red heart on it. As he took it, their hands brushed briefly, hers warm and steady, his colder than he realized. That simple exchange grounded him. There was something deeply real here, something untouched by digital noise or curated headlines. "You've got that look," she said, tilting her head, "like you're carrying a world no one else can see." Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he sipped the coffee and looked around the store again. A faded photograph of a baseball team hung near the door. A jar of hand-knitted potholders sat beside a stack of weathered paperbacks. Everything here told a story, and none of those stories had anything to do with him. "I'm just trying to find my way back," he said finally, eyes meeting hers. Marla nodded, like she'd heard those words from travelers a dozen times before. She didn't ask for more. Instead, she reached under the counter again, this time pulling out a folded map, an actual paper map, the kind you could never quite fold the right way again. "I don't use GPS," she said matter-of-factly. "Never trusted machines to tell me where to go." Elon smiled at that, amused and humbled all at once. He leaned over the counter, tracing the lines of the map with his finger, and she helped him find a fork where he must have missed the sign. The roads had names like Whispering Pines and Hollow Bend. They felt like places out of a novel, not coordinates. "You'll want to avoid going past Willow's End after dark," she warned, tapping the paper. "Not dangerous, just lonely. The kind of lonely that gets into your bones." Elon thanked her, folding the map as best he could and tucking it under his arm. But just as he turned to leave, something stopped him. A question. "What made you stay here all your life?" Marla considered that. She leaned back slightly, eyes searching something far beyond the walls of the store. "Because here," she said softly, "people look you in the eye when they ask how you're doing, and they wait for the real answer." Elon paused at the door, her words hanging in the air like warmth after a fire's been put out. Then, just before stepping outside, he turned back. What if someone's forgotten how to give a real answer? Marla smiled gently. Then they need to stay a little longer. The bell jingled again as the door closed behind him, and Elon stood under the overhang for a second, not quite ready to walk back into the misty quiet. He looked out at the empty street, map in hand, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about schedules or markets or satellites. He was thinking about eye contact, about silence, about whether he really knew how to answer when someone asked how he was. He didn't notice the boy across the street watching him. Around 10 or 11, maybe 12, with a hoodie too big for his frame and sneakers that looked like they'd seen more miles than they should have. The boy was sitting on the steps of the antique shop, bouncing a red rubber ball slowly, letting it hit the wet concrete and come back up like a heartbeat. He studied Elon like someone studies a puzzle that doesn't quite fit, curious, not intimidated. "You're not lost," the boy said as Elon crossed back over. Elon stopped. "No, nah, people who are lost don't usually walk like they're looking for something." Elon raised an eyebrow. "And what do people who are lost walk like?" The boy shrugged. "They don't walk at all. They stand still and hope someone notices." That answer struck something deep in Elon, something too fresh to name. He sat on the step beside the boy, careful not to slip on the damp surface. The kid didn't flinch or move away. They just sat there in silence for a beat, two mismatched strangers under gray skies, the red ball still bouncing softly. "You live around here?" Elon asked. "Yeah, over on Harlan Street, with my aunt." "Where are your parents?" The boy's bounce slowed. "Gone." Elon didn't press. He just nodded, letting that be enough. The boy looked up at him again, squinting. "You look familiar. You on TV or something?" "Sometimes," Elon said, "but maybe not in places like this." The boy nodded like he understood. "TV people don't come here unless something bad happens, like a flood or a fire. But nothing like that's happened in a while. So if you're here, maybe something bad happened to you." Elon didn't reply, but he didn't need to. The boy already knew. And something about being seen like that, not as the billionaire, not as the inventor or headline, hit harder than expected. A moment passed, and the boy held out his hand. "I'm Micah." "Elon." They shook hands, and it felt more like a contract than an introduction. Like something had just started, something neither of them understood yet. As the sky cracked open a little and the rain began to return, Micah stood up. "You should come with me," he said, pointing down the street. "Aunt Lainey makes the best cornbread on earth, and she always sets an extra place at the table, just in case." Elon blinked. That invitation, so simple, so absurd, wasn't something he could explain away with a polite excuse. So he didn't. He stood, folded the map again, and followed the boy into the deepening dusk. What do you think Micah's secret is? And why does this small town feel like something Elon was meant to find? If you're curious to see what happens next, and trust me, it only gets more unbelievable, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. New chapters drop soon, and you won't want to miss the next twist in this incredible journey. Now let us continue with our story. Micah's house was just a few blocks away from the antique store, but the walk there felt like a journey into another time. The homes were small and weather-worn, with wooden porches that spoke of long summers and forgotten storms. Behind the windows, even though curtains were drawn, Elon could glimpse flickers of quiet lives, a sewing machine lit by a soft lamp, a dinner table set for three, a radio playing something slow and bluesy. He walked beside the boy, the map still tucked under his arm, but already forgotten. What guided him now wasn't a printed route, but the strange feeling that he was supposed to follow Micah, as if the boy, with his thoughtful silence and curious eyes, was a living compass pointing towards something Elon didn't even know he was missing. Micah pushed open a rusty gate with a sharp creak, like the house itself was stretching its limbs to greet them. It was a modest two-story home, painted a soft, faded green. Flower pots lined the front steps, marigolds mint, and something purple that looked like it had been struggling since last season. Wind chimes whispered above the doorway, their notes delicate and uncertain in the evening breeze. "Aunt Lainey," Micah called out in a casual voice. "I brought someone." The woman who stepped into view had the kind of eyes that had cried often, but now seemed to smile easily. She was in her early 40s, her hair pulled into a loose bun, and she wore a flour-dusted apron like a badge of honor. She looked Elon up and down with a flicker of surprise, not because she recognized him, but simply because he wasn't someone who belonged to the rhythm of this town. "Come in before the night swallows you," she said, stepping aside with an easy warmth that made refusal impossible. Inside, the house smelled like fresh bread and sweet corn soup, comfort in its purest form. The soft hiss of a kettle mixed with the occasional creak of floorboards above. Micah disappeared down the hall, leaving Elon and Lainey in a cozy kitchen bathed in the amber glow of a single hanging bulb. "He doesn't usually bring people home," she said, her voice low and knowing, stirring something on the stove. "Especially not people who walk like they're carrying something heavy." Elon smiled, a tight, almost involuntary expression. The kind that didn't quite reach the eyes, but tried to be polite. "He found me," Elon said. "I think. I was walking in circles." Lainey didn't press. She just nodded slowly, her attention still half on the soup. There was no rush in her presence, no judgment, just an almost old-world ability to listen between the lines. "Sometimes," she said softly, "getting lost is the only way to figure out which direction you really want to go." She set a bowl in front of him, along with a slice of bread that was still warm to the touch. Elon took a bite and felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just food. It was memory. It was childhood. It was everything he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "You seem like someone used to giving orders," she said, sitting across from him with her own bowl. "But today, you've got the face of someone who needs someone else to give them one." That landed heavier than he expected. Elon, the man who moved industries and launched dreams into space, had no ready reply. Not here, not now. Not when spoken to like this, by someone who had nothing to gain from him, but gave him everything anyway. Micah returned, wearing a dry shirt and sitting quietly beside his aunt. He ate without rushing, glancing up at Elon now, and then, like he was still trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. They ate in calm silence, the kind that didn't demand conversation. When the plates were cleared, Lainey asked if Elon had somewhere to sleep. He shook his head. "We've got a couch and a wool blanket that still smells like Grandma," she said with a soft chuckle. "It's not fancy, but it welcomes." And just like that, Elon stayed. Later that night, long after the house fell quiet, Elon lay on the couch under a heavy knit blanket, his arms folded behind his head, staring at the ceiling. The room was dim, lit only by the moonlight filtering through lace curtains. He could hear the distant chirp of a cricket and the steady ticking of a wall clock. There was an old photograph on the upright piano, Micah as a toddler, grinning beside a woman who had the same eyes. She looked vibrant, alive, but the frame held more than joy. It held absence. Elon didn't need to ask. He could feel it, the way silence filled this house not as emptiness, but as memory. That's when he heard footsteps, light, cautious. Micah appeared at the edge of the room, his expression unreadable in the low light. He sat down on the floor beside the couch, pulling his knees up to his chest. He didn't say anything at first. "Can't sleep?" Elon asked softly. "Too many questions." "About what?" Micah hesitated. "About everything." Elon let the silence stretch. Then he asked, "Do you always sit with people when you can't sleep?" "Only when they feel like they're running away from something," Micah said. That hit hard. Elon looked over at the boy, and for a moment, he didn't see a child. He saw a soul that had grown up too fast. A witness to something painful, someone who carried quiet wisdom, like Scar. Micah turned toward him, voice low. "Do you think someone can fix what they don't understand?" Elon thought about that for a moment. The question was deceptively simple, but beneath it, he could sense the weight of Micah's world, whatever had brought him to that point. "Sometimes fixing isn't about understanding," Elon said. "It's about caring, even when you don't know why yet." Micah didn't reply. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, and then he got up and walked back to his room. And in that moment, as the floor creaked behind the boy and the blanket wrapped tighter around him, Elon felt something unfamiliar flicker inside, something quiet but undeniable. Hope. The morning light crept through the lace curtains, casting soft golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. Elon stirred beneath the heavy wool blanket, the scent of coffee and something sweet already drifting from the kitchen. He sat up slowly, still wrapped in the quiet comfort of the night before. For a moment, he didn't feel like Elon Musk. He felt like a man waking up in a place where time moved differently, slower, more deliberately. When he walked into the kitchen, Lainey was already by the stove, flipping something in a cast iron skillet. Micah was sitting at the table, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, a notebook open in front of him. He looked up and offered a nod that felt almost like a secret handshake between two people who had shared a moment neither fully understood yet. "Morning," Lainey said, not turning away from the skillet. "Hope you're hungry." "Starving," Elon replied, and it was the truth. But not just for food. She set down a plate with 2 thick pancakes, crispy on the edges, and a dollop of homemade apple butter on top. There was no need for extravagant presentation. It was made with care, and that alone made it feel like a feast. "Micah usually draws while I cook," Lainey said casually, pouring syrup into a small ceramic dish. "He says it helps him think." Elon glanced at the notebook and saw a sketch forming, rough pencil strokes outlining something like a strange machine, part rocket, part tree, with branches that looked like antennae. "You draw machines?" Elon asked, curiosity blooming. Micah nodded, flipping the notebook so Elon could see more. The next page had a blueprint of what looked like a flying house, complete with solar wings and rainwater collectors. Elon leaned in, studying the details. "These are good," he said honestly. "Really good." Micah shrugged, but his face showed a flicker of pride. "Just stuff I think about. Sometimes I don't sleep, so I draw instead." Elon looked back at the boy. "Ever think about building any of them?" Micah shrugged again. "I don't have parts. Or tools. Or time, really." Lainey set down a fresh mug of coffee in front of Elon and gave her nephew a look. "He has time. He just spends most of it making sure everyone else is okay first." Micah didn't argue. He just turned the page again and went back to sketching. Elon took a sip of the coffee and felt something shift inside him. Not the big, dramatic shifts he was used to, boardroom breakthroughs, paradigm-changing announcements, but something quieter, like a seed finding soil. After breakfast, Lainey handed Elon a clean shirt that had belonged to her late brother, and they stepped outside into the cool morning air. The town looked different in the light. Still small, still quiet, but no longer forgotten. Children were walking to school in pairs. A man in overalls was sweeping his front porch, and 2 women were setting up a table outside the church, arranging loaves of bread and jars of preserves. Micah ran ahead to catch up with a girl carrying a backpack covered in music stickers. Elon watched him for a moment before turning to Lainey. "He's something else." Lainey nodded. "He's got an old soul. Lost his mom when he was 8. My sister. Ever since then, he's been trying to make sense of the world by fixing little parts of it, drawing things that don't exist yet, dreaming about ways to keep people from breaking." Elon looked down the street, where Micah was now walking with the girl, laughing. He could be brilliant. With the right support, the right tools. Lainey raised an eyebrow, folding her arms. He doesn't need a savior, just someone who sees him. That stopped Elon, because she wasn't wrong. So often, he had approached people and problems with the urge to fix, to optimize, to engineer. But this wasn't about engineering. It was about presence, witness, respect. He walked slowly through the town, past shops with names like Martha's Quilts and Bailey & Sons Hardware. Every person he passed looked in the eye, some nodding, some smiling. No one pulled out a phone. No one asked for anything. It was as if the town had formed a silent agreement to let people just be. At the corner of Main and Sycamore, he found a small bookstore. The window display was a patchwork of novels, cookbooks, and local poetry anthologies. A sign taped to the glass read, "Closed for inventory, open to conversation." Curious, he pushed the door open and found a man in his 70s sitting on a stool, sorting through a box of used paperbacks. The smell of old pages and fresh coffee filled the room. "Morning," the man said. "Looking for anything specific?" Elon glanced around. "Not really. Maybe just something I didn't know I needed." The man smiled, reached into the box, and pulled out a small, tattered book. "Try this one. It's a collection of letters from soldiers during World War II. Not famous names, just people writing home, trying to remember what hope felt like." Elon took the book gently. "What do I owe you?" Pay what it's worth when you're done reading, the man replied, already turning back to his task. Elon left the shop with the book under his arm and a strange fullness in his chest. He walked past the diner, the gas station, and the small bridge that crossed a lazy creek. Each corner of the town seemed to hold a tiny piece of someone's story, and none of those stories seemed to care who he was, where he came from, or how much money he had. By the time he returned to Laney's house, Micah was back from school, sitting on the front steps with a notebook in his lap and his headphones on. He looked up when he saw Elon and pulled off one side of the headphones. "Want to see something?" he asked. Elon nodded, sitting beside him. Micah flipped to the last page. It was a drawing of a machine, round, with layers like an onion and a glowing center. It looked organic, alive. Not like a product, more like a heart. "What does it do?" Elon asked. Micah looked out across the street, thoughtful. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I think it listens. Not to sound, but to feeling." Elon blinked, and for once, he didn't try to define it, name it, or break it apart. He just nodded, and in that moment, something real passed between them. A shared silence, a knowing, the kind of connection that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. Later that afternoon, clouds began to gather again above the hills beyond the town, casting long shadows across the rooftops and gravel roads. Elon and Micah were still on the porch, the notebook now resting between them, pages fluttering in the light breeze like wings deciding whether to take flight. The conversation had slowed into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't demand words, only presence. Laney appeared at the doorway with 2 tall glasses of lemonade and a quiet smile. "Storm's probably coming tonight," she said. "Happens a lot this time of year. Sometimes the power goes out. Makes the stars look brighter, though." Elon accepted the glass, his fingers brushing hers. There was something in her gaze that reminded him of a kind of strength he'd never learned in boardrooms or launch pads, a strength forged not through ambition, but endurance. Through loving people, even when life had taken more than it gave. "Have you ever thought about leaving?" he asked. Laney laughed softly, leaning against the porch post. "When I was younger, I used to think about Chicago or maybe even New York. I thought I needed more noise, more lights, more chances. But then things happen. Life changes. And eventually, you realize peace isn't about where you are, it's about who you're with." Elon looked out at the street, where a young couple was walking their dog and waving to an elderly woman tending to her garden. "This place, it feels like it doesn't want anything from me." "That's the trick," Laney said. "It doesn't. That's what makes it so hard to leave." Micah turned the page of his notebook again, revealing another drawing, this one of what looked like a circular building with no doors, only windows. Inside, tiny human figures sat facing inward, surrounded by trees that seemed to grow from walls. It wasn't a school exactly. It wasn't a lab either. It was something else. Something undefined but oddly familiar. "What is this?" Elon asked. Micah shrugged. "A place where people remember who they are." Elon studied the page for a long time, then said quietly, "You should build it someday." Micah didn't smile, but his eyes lit up with something that looked a lot like belief. That evening, the sky finally broke open. Sheets of rain fell hard against the roof as thunder rolled through the valley like ancient drums. Laney lit candles throughout the house, their flickering glow dancing along the walls as shadows shifted and grew. The power cut out, just as she'd said it might, but no one seemed bothered. In fact, it made the space feel even more alive. They gathered in the living room, Laney knitting in her rocking chair, Micah on the floor with his drawings spread out like blueprints for dreams not yet realized, and Elon with the World War II letter book open in his lap. He read the words slowly, absorbing the inked emotions of strangers writing home from muddy trenches and frozen forests. Letters filled with longing, fear, humor, and hope. One passage struck him. "Sometimes I wonder if the world will remember me after this. But maybe it's not about being remembered. Maybe it's about remembering to live before the world forgets you." He read it aloud without thinking. Laney paused in her knitting, her needles still for a heartbeat. Micah looked up from his sketches. No one said anything right away. Then Lainey spoke, voice low. My sister used to say something like that. Before she passed, she believed the only real immortality was in kindness, small kindnesses that ripple out and out, even after we're gone. Elon swallowed, the lump in his throat unexpected and uninvited. He closed the book gently. There's this idea, he began, that to matter in the world, you have to go big. Build rockets, change economies, make noise. But maybe it's not the big things that last. Lainey looked over at him with a softness that said she already knew that. Micah added quietly, maybe the small things just take longer to be seen. The storm continued into the night. Rain drummed on the roof like a lullaby, and the candlelight glowed long after the conversation faded. Elon lay awake again on the couch, not restless this time, but thoughtful. The town had begun to etch itself into him, not in loud declarations, but in subtle impressions. A glance, a silence, a drawing in a notebook. He found himself wondering what it would take to stay. Not forever, maybe, but long enough to matter, long enough to leave something good behind. In the middle of the night, he got up and wandered to the kitchen, where the last candle still burned. He opened the notebook Micah had left on the counter and flipped back to the sketch of a listening machine, the one that responded to feeling. He stared at it for a long time. Then, with the corner of a nearby pencil, he wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. Let's build this together. Morning came soft and silent, like the world was holding its breath after the storm. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but the rain had stopped, leaving everything fresh and glistening. Dew clung to the grass like pearls, and puddles shimmered in the gravel road outside Lainey's house. Elon stood on the porch alone, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "You are exactly where you need to be." Inside, Lainey was humming something low and familiar as she moved through the kitchen, and Micah hadn't come out of his room yet. Elon didn't mind. He needed this quiet, this chance to just be a foreign feeling for someone whose life had been lived at warp speed for decades. He stared down the street, remembering the night before. That candlelight, that single sentence written in Micah's notebook, "Let's build this together." It had felt like a promise, not just to Micah, but to himself. That maybe, just maybe, he hadn't run out of things worth believing in. The screen door creaked open behind him. Micah stepped out, holding the notebook close to his chest like it was something sacred. "You meant it?" he asked, no greeting, no hesitation. Elon turned, met the boy's eyes. Every word. Micah sat beside him and opened the notebook slowly, flipping back to the drawing of the listening machine. He ran his finger along the lines he'd drawn, careful, reverent. It doesn't need to be big, just real, just enough. "Tell me what it does," Elon said. Micah hesitated, thinking, it's not for fixing things, it's for feeling them. Sometimes people don't know what they're feeling, and this helps translate it. It listens without words. And how would it know what someone's feeling? "I think it would learn," Micah replied, "from the way they hold it, their breath, maybe even their heartbeats. Not science the way people talk about it on TV. More like emotional resonance." Elon nodded slowly. "That's not impossible." Micah smiled faintly. "I didn't say it was. Just different." And that's when Elon felt it again, that quiet shift inside. The sense that this boy had tapped into something far ahead of his time. A kind of intelligence that didn't seek dominance but connection. It wasn't about invention, it was about intention. They spent the rest of the morning at the town library, a squat brick building with ivy crawling up its outer walls and a single wind chime by the front door. The librarian, a thin man in suspenders named Mr. Weller, greeted them like they were regulars. "Back again so soon?" he asked with a chuckle, eyeing Elon. Elon just smiled. "First time here, actually." "Not in spirit," Mr. Weller replied with a wink. "We've got blueprints, engineering texts, old schematics, but the real good stuff's in people's notebooks." He led them to a back room, dusty, warm, lined with old technical manuals, yellowing diagrams, and journals written by local tinkerers, inventors, and dreamers long forgotten by the outside world. Micah was in awe. He moved from shelf to shelf, scanning titles and pulling out drawings from the 1940s, notes on wind-powered irrigation from a farmer in 1963, even a rudimentary sketch of a wireless communication device written by a teenage girl in the 80s who'd never left the county. "These people were brilliant," Micah whispered. "They still are," Mr. Weller said gently. "Some of them live just up the road. They just stopped sharing. Not because they gave up, but because no one asked anymore." Elon felt something deep inside his chest stir. He turned to the librarian. "Has anyone ever collected these? Built from them?" Weller shook his head. "No one with the resources or the patience." And there it was, the crack of opportunity. The moment that felt like the first real blueprint of something bigger than just a project. That afternoon, they began gathering supplies from Bailey & Sons Hardware. The owner, a barrel-chested man named Hank, didn't blink when Elon asked for copper wiring, spare circuit boards, a soldering kit, and a toolbox. "Building something?" Hank asked, loading items into a cart. "Trying to," Elon replied. Hank grinned. "Just don't blow up anything with a mailbox." Last guy who did that ended up mayor. By evening, they'd cleared a space in the garage behind Laney's house. It wasn't much, just an old workbench, a flickering light bulb, and boxes of tools covered in sawdust, but it felt like sacred ground. Micah stood in the middle of it all, staring at the bench like it was a launch pad. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is where it begins." Elon placed the notebook down beside them and looked around. He'd seen assembly lines, underground bunkers, clean rooms that cost millions to sterilize, but none of them had felt like this. None had felt alive with so little. "What do you want to call it?" Elon asked, pointing to the machine. Micah thought for a long time, then whispered, "Hollow Tree." Elon tilted his head. "Why that?" "Hollow trees," Micah explained, "are the ones people think are dead. But they're not. They're still growing, just differently. And sometimes animals hide inside them. Birds build nests. Things survive in what people forget." Elon stared at him, struck dumb by the beauty of that explanation. "Hollow tree," he echoed softly. "It's perfect." And so, in the heart of a town that time had nearly forgotten, surrounded by tools older than he was and ideas far beyond what textbooks taught, Elon Musk and a boy with too much silence in his soul began building something not for profit, not for press, but for the simple and sacred act of listening. They didn't know who would need it. They only knew someone would. The next few days moved to a rhythm Elon hadn't felt in years, quiet, purposeful, unhurried. There were no deadlines hanging over his head, no board meetings or email chains demanding his attention. Just the smell of sawdust, the clatter of tools, and Micah's unfiltered genius pouring out page after page in that notebook of his. Every morning, they'd meet in the garage, Elon arriving with fresh coffee from Marla's Market and Micah already there, hoodie on, sleeves pushed up, the sketchbook open like scripture. They worked side by side, soldering components, repurposing old radios and weather sensors, coaxing life into what would soon become Hollow Tree, a device not meant to dominate the world, but to understand it. It wasn't just about circuits. They were building something emotional, responsive, something that would measure not just the tangible, but the invisible, the unspoken weight in someone's breath, the tremor in a still hand, the ache behind a polite smile. Micah's idea was abstract, but Elon saw the blueprint behind it. He added structure, logic, engineering, discipline, but it was Micah who gave the soul. One afternoon, as they were testing a biometric sensor salvage from an old medical device, Micah turned to Elon and said something that caught him off guard. "You used to make things like this, didn't you? Not this exactly, but things that mattered." Elon paused mid-wire rap. "I did," he said. "I think I forgot why." Micah nodded. "I think people forget when they get too loud, too seen." Elon looked at the boy, really looked. There was something about his way of speaking, the weight of his words. It wasn't just intelligence, it was perception. The way he understood the world was different, gentler, deeper. "You know you're not normal, right?" Elon said with a small smile. Micah smirked. "Good." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the town in honey gold, Elon joined Lainey and Micah on the back porch for dinner. The table was set simply: roast chicken, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls wrapped in a cloth napkin. Fireflies blinked lazily in the yard, and a distant dog barked twice before falling silent. "This is starting to feel permanent," Elon said between bites. Lainey looked at him with a mix of amusement and something like hope. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not," he admitted. "It's just surprising." She took a sip of iced tea, then leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You came here lost, Elon, but you didn't stay that way." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. After dinner, the three of them sat in lawn chairs under the open sky. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. Micah had pulled the notebook onto his lap again and was drawing something new, something layered and alive. Elon peered over his shoulder. "What's that one?" "A tree," Micah said, "but not a real one. More like a symbol. The hollow tree. I think we should build one you can actually sit inside. Like a pod. A safe place." Elon leaned back, watching stars begin to blink through the night sky. "You want to turn it into a space, not just a device." Micah nodded. "People need places that listen, not just things." Elon said nothing, but the idea stirred in him like a spark catching dry kindling. It was more than tech. It was more than design. It was a return to something humanity had almost forgotten: spaces that didn't just broadcast, but received. The next day, they brought a small version of Hollow Tree to the local community center. It looked like an oversized metal orb, about the size of a beach ball, with soft, root-like ridges etched along its surface. Inside were layers of sensors, LED feedback lights, and a heart-shaped core powered by repurposed kinetic energy, Micah's idea. They placed it on a wooden pedestal in the center of the lobby. At first, people just walked past it, curious but skeptical. But then Lainey sat down in front of it, quietly, gently, and it responded. The LEDs pulsed in rhythm with her breath. The air around her seemed to soften. Next, Mr. Weller from a library gave it a try. Then Hank from the hardware store. Then two kids who couldn't stop giggling but stared in awe when the orb dimmed and brightened in sync with their laughter. It didn't speak, but everyone who touched it felt something. Something they didn't have words for. News spread fast, not online, but person to person, neighbor to neighbor. By sundown, nearly 50 people had come through just to sit with it, not to be entertained, just to be heard. Micah stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching it all with a strange look on his face. Elon approached him. "How do you feel?" Micah hesitated, scared. "Why?" "Because it worked." Elon smiled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's the best kind of scared." For the first time since they'd met, Micah leaned into the gesture. Just slightly, but it was enough. That night, Elon stood in the garage long after everyone else had gone to bed. He was staring at the second prototype, a larger version of Hollow Tree they'd already started wiring together. He thought about his companies, his factories, the endless pressure to produce, scale, monetize. But here in this small-town garage with mismatched tools and flickering bulb overhead, something more powerful was taking shape. Not innovation for profit, not disruption for ego, but connection for the sake of healing. He didn't know what would happen next, if he'd stay, if this town was a pause or a new beginning. But one thing was certain: he wasn't lost anymore. It had only been a week since the prototype had been placed in the community center, but in that short time, Hollow Tree had become more than just an invention. It was a ritual, a quiet moment in the noise of life. People came not to be amazed, but to feel something, often something they hadn't let themselves feel in years. They came with grief, with wonder, with aching silence. And somehow, the little orb seemed to meet them there. Elon found himself returning every day, not just to observe, but to listen. He sat in the back, watched the way people approached it, cautiously at first, then with unexpected trust. He saw a retired schoolteacher close her eyes and weep softly. A teenage boy bring in his nonverbal sister and watch her light up with quiet fascination. A widower place both hands on the orb and whisper something no one else could hear. And the device responded each time, not with words, but with breath-like pulses of light, a soft spectrum of presence. There was no algorithm here, no monetization plan, no branding strategy, just humanity, raw and unfiltered. One afternoon, Elon and Micah sat together in the corner of the room, sketchbooks open, surrounded by crumpled notes and diagrams. They were already working on version 2, bigger, more sensitive, capable of tracking micro-expressions, vocal harmonics, even temperature shifts in the palm. Elon watched Micah work, his pencil darting across the page with silent certainty. You know, Elon said, "You've already changed more lives with this than most people do in a lifetime." Micah didn't look up. "I don't want to change lives." That made Elon pause. "I just want to remind people they still have one," the boy finished, glancing up at last. It was in that moment that Elon realized Micah wasn't trying to change the world. He was trying to restore it, piece by piece, person by person. Later that day, while walking back through the town, Elon was stopped by a man standing outside the diner. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a long gray beard and a voice like cracked leather. "You're the guy building that thing?" Elon nodded. "With Micah, yeah." The man scratched his chin. "I ain't much for tech. I still yell at my toaster. But my wife, she's had trouble talking since her stroke last year. Can't find words most days. But she sat with your little light-up marble for 5 minutes yesterday, and afterward, she hummed. For the first time in 11 months. Elon said nothing, but the man's eyes began to glisten. "You ever build something that made a person remember who they were?" The words landed hard. Elon nodded slowly. "Maybe once." The man placed a rough hand on his shoulder. "Then keep building it." That night, back at Laney's house, the garage looked different. Not just cluttered or busy, but alive. As if it had become a vessel for something sacred. Micah was rearranging sensor coils on the new casing, humming under his breath. Laney stood by the door, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "I don't know what's happening out there," she said softly to Elon. "But people are changing. I can feel it." Elon took the tea. "I think they're just remembering they can feel it all." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the boy work. There was something magnetic about him, focused but soft, like he carried the weight of a world no one else could see. "Micah's always been tuned in," Laney whispered. "After his mom passed, he just started listening to everything. Not with his ears, with his heart." Elon nodded, his voice almost reverent. "He doesn't build things to solve problems. He builds them to listen to pain." Laney's eyes glistened. "That's the rarest kind of genius." Later that evening, as Micah adjusted the final component of Hollow Tree's second prototype, the orb glowed in a new way, less like a pulse and more like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, undeniable. Micah stepped back, breathing slowly, watching it flicker. "It's ready," he said. "For what?" Elon asked. Micah looked up at him, his expression unreadable but fierce. "For the people who don't even know they need it yet." And the next morning, something extraordinary happened. They took the new version of Hollow Tree to the school. The principal, a warm man named Mr. Carrington, had been skeptical at first, unsure how a strange glowing orb would fit into lesson plans and recess bells. But when he saw the students line up, curious but open, he stepped aside. Within an hour, everything changed. The first child, a second grader named Ellie, who hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, placed her hand on the orb and smiled without prompting. A few minutes later, a boy who had been suspended 3 times for anger issues sat cross-legged in front of it and whispered, "I'm tired," to no one in particular. Elon stood in the back of the classroom, stunned. Not because it worked, he believed it would, but because it worked that fast. Teachers cried. Kids sat in circles, taking turns with it like it was a sacred object. Even the most skeptical staff members began jotting down thoughts about how they might incorporate empathy time into the curriculum. Micah barely reacted. He just took notes, measured responses, watched the lights. He was already thinking of version 3. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from purpose. He walked through the quiet town, passing shuttered stores and lamplights, until he reached the edge of a creek behind Laney's property. There, under the starlight, he sat with his own thoughts for the first time in days. And he realized something that chilled him, not in fear, but in humility. This wasn't his story anymore. It never had been. He was just one of the characters in Micah's. And that, strangely, was the most peaceful truth he'd ever known. The day after the school visit, everything shifted. What had started as an experiment, an unlikely collaboration in a dusty garage, was now becoming something the town spoke about in hushed, reverent tones. Not because it was flashy or futuristic, but because it worked. Gently, quietly, like rain softening hardened soil. By noon, Hollow Tree was all over the school's morning announcements, and that same afternoon, the superintendent called Laney's house personally, not to question the project, but to ask if it could be shared with neighboring districts. Word had spread, not through social media or headlines, but through children. Through the small, undeniable way they walk home lighter, more open. Micah took it all in with that same calm focus. He didn't seek attention. He barely spoke when people praised the device. Instead, he just kept building, adjusting internal vibration levels, refining response algorithms, tuning the way the orb breathed in reaction to different emotions. To him, success wasn't applause. It was resonance. On Friday afternoon, the community center opened its doors again. But this time, it wasn't just neighbors from the town. A family had driven in from the next county. A retired nurse and her husband arrived after hearing about it at their church. A young woman from a nearby shelter came with her caseworker and held Hollow Tree for 20 minutes, not saying a single word, but tears streamed down her face the whole time. And still, Elon stood in the background, not directing, not leading, just being. Something about this project had rewritten his sense of scale. This wasn't about changing the world overnight. It was about remembering that change often starts in the smallest places, with trust, with presence, with one person being seen. That evening, as dusk folded gently over the town, Elon found Micah sitting alone on the back porch, sketching. "People are starting to ask questions," Elon said, taking a seat beside him. "About what? About where this is going, how far we want to take it." Micah didn't answer right away. He was drawing a series of circles that seemed to radiate outward, concentric shapes like ripples in a pond. At the center was a heart. At the edges, people. "It's not about how far," Micah said. "It's about how deep." Elon nodded slowly. "You're not afraid this'll get too big?" Micah shook his head. "I'm afraid people will try to make it something it's not." That hit hard, because Elon knew that story. He'd lived that story. "Then we protect it," he said, "together." Micah looked up at him, serious. "Promise." "I promise." It was the kind of moment that didn't need fanfare, just truth. Later that night, as Laney baked a fresh batch of peach cobbler and the scent filled the house, a knock came at the front door. Laney wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find two strangers standing on the porch. They introduced themselves as Ava and Jonathan, visiting researchers from a university in another state. They'd heard whispers about the Hollow Tree project from a former student who taught nearby. Their tone was respectful, their interest clearly genuine, but Elon's body tensed the moment he heard the words, "academic collaboration." "We're not here to disrupt anything," Ava said, sensing the tension. We've never seen anything like this. A device that responds not to action, but to emotion, to presence. It's like someone remembered how to build with feeling," Jonathan added. Micah stood behind Elon in the hallway, silent but watchful. "We've brought equipment," Ava continued. "Only if you're comfortable. We'd love to observe, maybe even help refine what's already working. With permission." Elon looked at Micah. Micah looked at Laney. And then the boy nodded just once. "Okay," he said, "but this doesn't become a project. This stays a space." Ava smiled. Understood. The researchers set up quietly in the garage that weekend. No banners, no logos, no interviews. Just observation, respect, a listening posture. And that, more than anything, reinforced to Elon what Micah had built, not just a machine, but a boundary, a sanctuary. Sunday morning came with clear skies and the smell of honeysuckle drifting in through the windows. The town held a small gathering in the park, a spontaneous potluck organized by Marla and Hank and half a dozen other neighbors who just wanted to celebrate something. They didn't even call it an event. It was more like a pause, a collective exhale. Elon sat on a picnic blanket with Micah and Lainey, sharing stories, passing plates, and laughing more than he had in years. Children ran barefoot through the grass. A teenager played guitar under a tree. An old man recited a poem no one had heard in decades. And in the center of it all sat a new hollow tree unit, now enclosed in a protective wooden shell, designed to resemble a natural stump, glowing softly from within, like a heartbeat in the soil. People didn't rush toward it. They approached slowly, sat beside it, touched it like a memory. As the sun began to dip, casting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Lainey turned to Elon. "Did you ever think getting lost would feel like coming home?" Elon didn't answer. He just smiled, full and quiet. That night, back on the porch, Micah handed him a page from his notebook. On it was a new drawing, not of a device, not of a room, of a map, a network of hollow trees, some in schools, some in hospitals, some in parks or train stations or libraries. Each one small, each one glowing, not connected by satellites or cloud storage, connected by intention. Places where people could pause, breathe, feel. "You think we can do this?" Micah asked. Elon traced the line between two dots on the sketch. "I don't think we can afford not to." And as the crickets began their nighttime chorus and the stars unfolded overhead, they sat there with that page between them. Two dreamers building something quieter than a revolution, but far more enduring. By the start of the second week, Hollow Tree wasn't just a name. It had become part of the town's rhythm. It was as present as morning coffee and evening porch lights. No longer an experiment, it was now a kind of anchor, quiet, constant, and mysteriously transformative. Wherever it went, people grew softer, calmer, more honest. The next Hollow Tree unit was placed in the town clinic. Dr. Marin, a tall woman with streaks of silver in her ponytail, and the gaze of someone who'd seen too much suffering for one lifetime, agreed to give it space in the waiting room. The moment it arrived, the tone of the clinic began to change. Patients who usually fidgeted with nerves now sat in reflective silence. Parents whispered more gently to their children, and even those walking through grief or pain seemed to breathe more evenly as they placed a hand on its wooden surface. Dr. Marin pulled Elon aside after a few days. "I had a woman come in with migraines so bad she couldn't speak. She sat with Hollow Tree for 15 minutes. Her vitals stabilized before we even touched her. You're not building tech," she said. "You're building medicine." That word hit Elon harder than expected. Later, back in the garage, he repeated it out loud to Micah. "Medicine." Micah nodded, but not to fix, to soothe. They'd begun referring to Hollow Tree not in units or versions, but as grows. Each one was crafted slightly differently. Each carried a different tone, different energy, even different materials depending on where it was meant to live. The one for the library had pages of books pressed into its base. The one for the fire station used iron reclaimed from an old ladder truck. And the latest prototype for the town's veterans' home incorporated fragments of a retired service medal, Micah's idea. One evening, as Elon sanded the edge of a new casing and Micah soldered a delicate connection board, Lainey entered the garage holding a package. "It's from the university," she said, setting it down on the table. The researchers sent something back. Inside was a bound journal. On the front, Hollow Tree, Field Notes, Week 1. It wasn't filled with data, not graphs or statistics, just handwritten observations, emotions, stories, dozens of them. A man sat with the orb for 20 minutes and left without filling his prescription for anti-anxiety meds. Said he felt heard for the first time in years. A child who hasn't drawn in 6 months went home and filled 4 pages with color after sitting with Hollow Tree. Staff morale increased. Nurses reported fewer verbal conflicts in high-stress rooms. It was not clinical. It was not monetizable. It was something else entirely. Real. By the end of the week, Elon and Micah had mapped out 10 more grows. They kept them small, designed intentionally, and placed strategically throughout the town. At a church, in the corner of a local diner, even inside an old barn that had been converted into a music studio by a retired jazz saxophonist. Each time, Hollow Tree responded to its new home in ways no one could fully predict. In the diner, it picked up laughter and seemed to glow brighter in moments of shared joy. In the church, it dimmed with reverence when the choir rehearsed. In the music barn, it vibrated, gently, in tune, like it wanted to sing along. And Elon, he changed too. He no longer slept restlessly. He no longer checked his phone every 5 minutes. In fact, his phone spent most days turned off, forgotten in a drawer beside the couch. He started walking more, talking more, listening better. One morning, he walked past the corner where he'd first seen Micah, sitting on the steps, bouncing that red rubber ball in the rain. The antique shop still stood. The sky was just as gray, but everything else had changed. He turned and looked toward the school. He knew that somewhere inside one of the hollow trees was pulsing gently, holding space for someone who needed it. At Laney's house, life had adopted a rhythm of its own. Elon helped in the kitchen, took turns doing dishes, read aloud at night. He had become something he never imagined he'd be again. Rooted, and yet something tugged at the edges of that peace. Because news was spreading. Quietly, yes, but spreading. One night, as they sat on the porch, Micah asked the question first. What happens when people start wanting more? Elon sighed, folding his hands in his lap. They will. Micah stared at the stars. What if they want to own it? Elon looked over. Then we don't let them. Micah nodded slowly. I don't want it to become a product. I don't want a version 10 or a launch event or a commercial with fake families holding hands. Elon chuckled. Neither do I. But how do we stop it from becoming that? And that's when Elon said something he hadn't said in years. We don't scale it. We steward it. Micah tilted his head. We don't rush it, Elon said. We don't mass produce. We guide it. Let each grow, be its own living thing. Handmade, tended, like a garden, not a factory. And Micah, for the first time in all their time together, smiled wide. That's it. That night, they drew up a different kind of plan. Not for expansion, but for protection, for sustainability, for integrity. They called it the Hollow Tree Circle, a small group of guardians and builders who would carry forward the spirit of the project, one grow at a time, only when the world asked gently enough. It wasn't a business model. It was a covenant. A week after the clinic grow was placed, the first letter arrived. Handwritten, folded neatly, no return address. It simply read, I visited your town. I didn't speak to anyone, just sat beside one of the trees. I didn't cry, but I could have. I haven't felt that kind of stillness in 10 years. Please don't stop. Elon found it on the porch, tucked beneath a jar of peach preserves someone had left as thanks. The note was unsigned, but the message was clear. Hollow Tree was no longer secret. And secrets, once they glow in the dark, tend to call out to the world. The next day, a car with out-of-state plates pulled into Marla's Market. Then another one showed up near the library. By mid-afternoon, 3 visitors were standing quietly in the chapel hallway beside the second grow. One of them, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and red-rimmed eyes, simply placed a palm on the surface, closed his eyes, and exhaled. When he opened them, he turned to Elon, who had arrived to check on the sensors, and whispered, "Thank you," before walking away, without another word. That evening, Laney sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through a small stack of envelopes, some from local residents, others postmarked from cities Elon hadn't visited in years. Each one contained something similar, a story, a plea, a poem, a donation, and a request. Can you bring a hollow tree here? Micah stayed silent for a long time after they'd read them all. Then he pushed his chair back from the table, walked to the garage and sat alone with the prototype on the workbench. Elon followed after a while, not speaking, just watching as the boy stared at the soft internal glow of the orb. It wasn't pulsing, just breathing, like it knew something was coming. "I don't want it to become noise," Micah said eventually. "The world already has too much noise." "I know. I want every hollow tree to be heard before it's seen." Elon sat on the stool across from him. "So we make a plan." Micah nodded, not looking up. "But it has to start small. It has to grow where it's needed, not where it's wanted for attention." They spent hours that night building what they called the Grove List, a document scribbled first on a chalkboard and then transferred into notebooks with criteria that wasn't based on revenue potential, population density, or media attention, but on resonance. If a place asked gently if it was ready to receive and protect something sacred, it would be considered. If not, it would wait. And something about that choice, about slowness in a fast world, felt revolutionary. But revolution has a way of attracting eyes. On Monday morning, an SUV rolled up to Laney's home and parked beside the hedge of blooming azaleas. Two men stepped out, well-dressed, polite, polished. They introduced themselves as representatives from a tech consortium, a multinational one. They had read whispers, followed trails. They'd heard Elon was involved in a quiet hardware initiative with remarkable social response. They smiled the way people smile when they're already holding out contracts in their minds. "We'd love to partner," one of them said. "Bring this to market. Make it accessible at scale. You know how many lives this could touch?" Elon didn't flinch. "You mean own it?" he replied. "No," the man said smoothly. "We mean share it." Micah stood by the door, listening, not speaking, his face like stone. Laney offered coffee. They declined. "We're not selling," Elon said flatly. "Mr. Musk, this has the potential to transform entire industries. Healthcare, education, public safety. We're talking billions." "Exactly," Elon said. "And that's why we're not interested." They left shortly after. Not rudely, but with the quiet efficiency of people who rarely hear no. As they backed down the driveway, Elon glanced at Micah and found the boy already walking toward the garage. That night, they reinforced the casing on the latest grow. Not just to protect it from physical harm, but from misunderstanding, from misuse, from greed. And yet, the town kept reaching outward, not with ambition, but with curiosity. Families from nearby communities came and sat in front of the groves. Local artists began painting hollow tree in murals, sometimes as a glowing core inside a human chest, other times as a literal tree with roots stretching toward people's feet. A teacher wrote a play inspired by it. A mechanic etched its patterns into hubcaps and left them anonymously around town, like gifts. A woman in her 90s said she'd been dreaming of something like it for decades, and now she just liked sitting near it because it hums the same as my heart. Every night, new letters arrived. Every morning, a new visitor appeared. But no one asked about Elon. No cameras, no autographs, no questions about his companies. They just asked if they could sit for a while. And that was enough. One night, under a crescent moon, Elon and Micah walked through the town quietly. Past the barn, the diner, the school, the bench where Micah's red rubber ball still lived, half deflated now, but never discarded. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. At the far edge of town, near a grove of old cedar trees, they stopped. "We could place one here," Micah said. Elon nodded. "Not for people, just for the forest." Micah looked at him. Trees listened too. So they began building one that night. A grow not for humans, but for the wild. It would sense rainfall, wind patterns, root vibrations, bird calls. Not to analyze or report, but to witness. A tribute to the spaces that had been listening long before humanity remembered how to. That, they decided, would be the 11th grow. Not in a school or a church or a clinic, but in the woods. A few mornings after the forest grow was placed, Elon woke before sunrise. Not from stress, not from noise, but from a kind of stirring. A feeling in his chest like a gentle hand nudging him awake. The town was still. Windows dark, porches quiet, the gravel roads untouched by tires or feet. He walked slowly through the hush, coffee in one hand, the other tucked in his jacket pocket as a light fog curled low across the earth. He ended up at the edge of the woods. The 11th grove still glowed faintly beneath the cedar, even with no one there. The birds hadn't started their chorus yet, but something alive was pulsing in the air, like breath, like belonging. And for a moment, Elon didn't feel like the engineer or the visitor or the man who once chased the stars. He felt like a part of something older, quieter. By the time he returned to Laney's porch, Micah was already there, hoodie up, notebook open in his lap. "You felt it too?" the boy asked. Elon nodded. "Yeah." They didn't say more. They didn't have to. Later that day, a new letter arrived, delivered by hand this time from someone who had come from 4 towns away. The woman was in her 30s, soft-spoken, eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue that doesn't sleep off. She introduced herself as Claire. "My son doesn't speak," she said, voice shaking. "He doesn't cry either. But he sat in front of the grow at the community center yesterday. And afterward he hugged me. Not tight, just on purpose. He hadn't done that since his dad died." Elon and Laney stood in silence as Claire took out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing crude in crayon. A blue circle, 2 hands, and above it, 3 crooked letters. "Try." Micah stepped out from a hallway just then, saw the drawing, and smiled. "That one's working," he said softly. Claire looked at him, stunned. "You built this." Micah didn't answer, but he walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out an extra orb shell, a spare casing he'd carved with leaf patterns, and handed it to her. "No wires yet," he said, "but it still listens." She held it to her chest like it was something alive. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Micah just nodded. "You already did." That night, the town gathered again, not to celebrate, but to reflect. A bonfire was lit in the park, not large, but steady. No one gave a speech. No music played. People just stood or sat around the glow. Some holding hands, some in silence. One elderly man strummed a slow melody on a worn guitar. And at the center, a grove sat on a stone pedestal, its light breathing in rhythm with the flames. Elon stood near the edge of the gathering, watching it all unfold. Not as a leader, not as a creator, just as someone lucky enough to witness it. Laney walked over and handed him a folded piece of cloth. It was a scarf, soft and hand-stitched. The word "here" had been embroidered into one end. "What's this?" he asked. She smiled. "A reminder." He looked at her. "That you don't need to disappear into the sky to matter," she said. "Sometimes the most important orbit is the one that brings you back down." Elon's throat tightened. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the fire dimmed, Micah sat alone with the grow. He placed both palms on it, closed his eyes, and whispered something Elon couldn't hear. He walked over, sat beside him. "You thinking about the grove list?" Elon asked. Micah nodded. "I think it's going to grow faster than we planned." Elon exhaled. "It already is." "But we can't build them all," Micah said. "Not us. Not just us." "No," Elon agreed. "But we can teach others how, if they're willing to listen, not just build." Micah looked up. "We'll need stewards." Elon nodded. "We'll need people who know what quiet means." The wind moved gently through the trees. The orb between them glowed softer now, like it knew the night was ending, but something else was just beginning. As they rose to leave, Elon paused. "You ever wonder why I ended up in this town?" Micah shrugged. "Maybe you were looking for something you didn't know existed." Elon smiled. "And what was that?" The boy looked out at the trees, at the quiet, a place that doesn't want to change you, just hold you. And with that, they walk home. No headlines, no noise, just 2 people walking back through the dark, their path lit by something that didn't need to speak to be heard. By midweek, the town knew something was different. Not in the wind or the trees, but in the silence between conversations, in the way cars slowed just a little more at stop signs, in how people lingered longer outside the community center. Because outsiders were arriving now. Not just the soft-hearted wanderers or the grieving parents who came quietly. No, these ones brought clipboards, lanyards, cameras, reporters. The first article hit a tech blog that Thursday. Elon Musk disappears and might be building the future of emotional AI in secret. It showed a satellite photo of a familiar barn, the outline of the community center, and a blurry image of what might have been a hollow tree glow. By the end of the day, more followed. Speculation, conjecture, think pieces about new paradigms in neural feedback. Terms like effective computing and biometric empathy devices flooded the headlines. Elon didn't read most of it, but the town did. At Marla's market, someone knocked over a shelf trying to get a clear phone picture of the old woman behind the counter. At the library, a young journalist cornered Mr. Weller with questions about who built the orbs. At the school, teachers closed the blinds and told the students not to speak to anyone in the parking lot with a press badge. The town, so open and soft just a week ago, began a brace. That night, Elon sat with Lainey on the porch, watching the sun vanish behind the trees. She held a mug of herbal tea in one hand, her expression unreadable. "They're going to keep coming," she said. "I know. They'll want to package it, trademark it, wrap it in slogans and sell it at airports." "I know." She sipped her tea. "So what are you going to do?" Elon leaned forward, hands clasped. "I'm going to listen. Then I'm going to protect." Micah emerged from a house not long after, notebook in hand, a visible crease between his brows. He sat down without a word and opened to a new page. At the top, he wrote one word: vessels. Elon leaned over. "What's that?" "We can't keep the Grows here forever," Micah said. "They'll come for them. Or worse, try to copy them without understanding." Elon nodded slowly. "So we send them away," Micah continued. "But not like packages. Like seeds. With people we trust. With people who know how to hold them. Not just place them." And so began the idea of the vessels. Individuals from different towns, schools, communities, people who had felt the hollow tree hum in their chest and were willing to learn how to carry it. Not everyone would be allowed. Not everyone should. There would be no digital application process, no marketing funnel, only letters, only invitations. Each vessel would receive not a finished grow, but a kit, unfinished, imperfect, requiring care, requiring time. They would build it with their own hands, with guidance from a circle. They would infuse it with meaning, and only then would it begin to listen. By the weekend, 5 names had been chosen. All were people who had come quietly, who had sat, not spoken, who had asked nothing but left changed. Elon reached out to each by hand, phone calls, handwritten replies, a visit to one woman who lived by the edge of a lake. The conversations were gentle, clear. "This isn't about product," he told them. "It's about presence." Some wept when they were chosen. And so the first vessels began to leave the town carrying hand-carved boxes with unfinished cores inside, light dormant waiting. But not everyone welcomed the secrecy. At the diner, someone shouted across the counter, "Why does he get to decide who deserves one?" At the park, a woman in a smart blazer with a tech ID badge tried to intercept one of the vessels, offering funding, interviews, full-scale production in exchange for the core. She was refused, but the pressure was building. On Sunday, Elon stood before the full town in the school gym. No cameras, just folding chairs and the warm buzz of shared concern. Micah sat beside him on the stage, arms folded, eyes wide and unreadable. Elon stepped to front. "I didn't come here to build something," he began. "I came here because I was lost. Because the world I helped create, loud, fast, and clever, had stopped feeling human." He looked out across the crowd, faces he now knew by name. Faces that had given him back something he didn't know he'd lost. "This place," he said, "helped me remember what matters. And now, people want to take what you've grown and turn it into something easy. Something scalable. Something empty." A quiet fell. "So we won't let them," he said. "Not because we're afraid, but because we believe. In slowness, in silence, in things that breathe." He looked over at Micah. In this boy's heart, an idea was born. And instead of turning it into noise, you all made it into meaning. Thank you. There was no applause, just stillness, deep and complete. Afterward, people came forward one by one, not to ask for a grow, not to pitch an idea, just to say thank you. And Micah, he never left the stage. He sat there, notebook in his lap, drawing something no one could see yet. Elon didn't look. He didn't need to. He already knew whatever it was, it would listen. The following days were quiet, but not peaceful. The town had returned to its usual pace on the surface. Kids walked to school. The bell over Marla's market rang gently with each entry, and dogs napped under front porches. But there was something underneath, a slow ripple of tension, a collective breath being held. The press hadn't stopped. They had simply learned to stand farther back. A drone was spotted above the church hollow tree. Someone tried to buy Mr. Weller's journal collection. A man disguised as a repair technician snuck into the music barn and tried to scan one of the orbs. He was found by a group of teens who quietly walked him out and told no one. But still, Micah heard. "They're circling," he told Elon that evening as they sat in the garage with the next grow between them, "waiting for us to mess up or get tired." "We won't mess up," Elon said. Micah shook his head. "But we might get tired." Elon looked at him, really looked. The boy who never asked for praise, who never sought spotlight or control. He wasn't afraid of failing, he was afraid of compromise. "I have an idea," Elon said quietly, "but it won't be easy." Micah raised an eyebrow. "What if we let them take one?" Elon asked. Micah froze. "Not the real one," Elon clarified. "A decoy, a mirror." Micah sat back, thinking, like a hollow tree that only looks like it listens. Elon nodded. "Something that reflects emotion, mimics it, without understanding, without depth." Micah's jaw clenched. "So they'll believe they have the thing, but it's hollow." Elon didn't smile. "That's the point. It'll show them what they're asking for, not what they need." And so, late into the night, the two of them built what came to be called the Echo, a near-perfect replica. Same outer design, same glow, same patterns. But inside, it was fundamentally different. It didn't listen. It mirrored. It recorded reactions and played them back in rhythmic pulses, giving users the illusion of being understood. It was responsive but not present, engaging but not alive. "It's like a haunted house version of Hollow Tree," Micah whispered. "All reflection, no soul." And that was exactly the lesson. 2 days later, the Echo was placed, on purpose, in a small clearing just outside of town, near a pull-off on the scenic highway where photographers and journalists frequently parked. No sign, no announcement, just a glowing orb resting on a stone base, perfectly visible from the road. Within hours, it was swarmed. A live stream started. Comments poured in. "We found it." Musk's secret project exposed. Emotional AI, feel the future. But as the visitors crowded around trying to provoke a response, trying to decode its rhythms, trying to bend the device to their curiosity, something odd happened. They grew frustrated. "It's just copying me," one person complained. "It flashes the same way no matter what I say," another said. "It's like it pretends to care." Some still believed in its magic. Most didn't. And Elon and Micah watched it all from a distance, across the field behind a stand of trees. Not laughing, not smug, just tired. "They think this is what we built," Micah said. "But it's not," Elon replied. A pause. "And maybe now," he added, "they'll feel the difference. The absence, the emptiness." Micah nodded. "Because it's missing the thing they don't know how to measure." Elon turned to him. "What's that?" "Sincerity." The word hit like a bell in a silent room. That night, as they returned to Laney's, the lights inside were low. She was waiting for them at the table with 2 envelopes in her hand. "These came by courier," she said. "No names, no return address." Elon opened the first. Inside, a check for $10 million and a typed note that read, "Let us distribute, let us scale, let us be the heartbeat of the future." No signature, Micah opened the second. Inside, a folded piece of paper with 5 handwritten words. Please don't let them win. They sat in silence. Laney eventually took the check and fed it to the wood stove. It curled, smoked, and vanished. Micah folded the second letter and placed it inside his notebook. Later, Elon stepped outside into the night air, the stars bright above him, the town quiet once again. He pulled out his phone, off for days, and typed a single tweet. Some things shouldn't scale. Some things should stay sacred. You'll know them by how gently they ask to be held. He turned the phone off again and left it on the porch. 2 days after the Echo's debut, something unexpected happened. Not in the town, but in the people. Not in the headlines or broadcasts, but in the undercurrent, like the moment before a tide turns. Someone left a handwritten letter taped to the door of the library. The note was short but powerful. I touched the one by the road. It felt empty. Then I touched the one by the school. It felt like it remembered me. More notes followed. People began leaving them in quiet places, on porch railings, tucked under hollow tree pedestals, inside returned books. Notes that said things like, "This isn't technology. This is grief with a pulse." I said goodbye to my son by whispering into it. It didn't speak back, but I knew it heard me. Please don't let the loud ones ruin the quiet places. Micah collected them in a shoebox. He never read them aloud. He didn't have to. You could feel them just by holding the weight of the box. Elon watched him become something even more than a builder. A keeper, a guardian of tone and spirit. Hollow Tree had begun as a listening machine, but it was becoming something else entirely. A vessel for emotional truth. A map of humanity's inner world. And as that transformation deepened, something shifted in Elon too. He no longer dreamed in numbers and rocket trajectories. Now his thoughts moved through memories, through gestures, through moments of stillness he'd once rushed past. He started spending time with people, not projects. Listening to stories, not pitches. Remembering names, remembering faces, remembering himself. But not everyone was happy. A man in a charcoal suit showed up at the town border with a team of legal aides. He claimed to represent a major AI firm and carried documents asserting prior patents connected to biometric sensory devices. He was not welcomed. At the hardware store, Hank told him plainly, "Whatever you're here for, it doesn't belong to you." At the market, Marla said, "We don't sell stillness here." At the clinic, Dr. Marin stood between him and the waiting room grow and said, "This one already has patience and a purpose. You're not it." He left, but his visit left a shadow. Later that week, someone broke into the school after dark. They didn't steal anything, but the grow in the hallway, Hollow Tree 4, had been taken apart, carefully, examined, photographed, left in pieces. Micah found it early the next morning. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just knelt down and began rebuilding it. Alone, quiet, focused. Elon came later and sat beside him on the tile floor. The boy didn't speak, so Elon didn't either. They just worked together in silence. By noon, it was whole again. And when Micah touched it, the glow came back, not just as a light, but as forgiveness. That night, Elon stood in the garage and did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed, not to a god, but to the idea that this, what they'd made, might survive the weight of the world's hunger. And as he finished, Micah entered quietly. "I want to do something," the boy said. Elon turned. "What?" "I want to build the 12th grow. But this one, it doesn't stay here." Elon's brow furrowed. "Where does it go?" Micah held out a sheet of paper. It was a drawing. A mountain. A train track. A station with cracked benches and long-forgotten signs. "Somewhere forgotten," he said. "Somewhere lonely. A place that doesn't even know it needs to be listened to." Elon took a deep breath. "All right, then we build it." The 12th grow began that very night. Unlike the others, it was built without a home. It had no destination, only intention. It was carved not with circuitry in mind, but with longing, with ache, with tenderness. And when it was done, Micah did something strange. He stood beside it and began to sing. It was a soft, wordless melody, something between a lullaby and a hum, a note passed down by instinct rather than memory. The grow pulsed with the rhythm of it, matched it, learned it, and then held it. Elon listened, stunned. "That's the calibration protocol?" he asked. Micah shook his head. "That's gratitude." And somehow, Elon understood exactly what he meant. It was just after sunrise when Elon and Micah loaded the 12th grow into the back of an old pickup truck. No security detail, no convoy, no media. Just two people, a wooden crate, and a cooler of sandwiches Laney had packed with a handwritten note tucked inside. "Not everything needs an audience. Just care." They didn't tell the town they were leaving. Not because they didn't want goodbyes, but because this wasn't an ending. This was planting. The road took them north, through farmland that rolled like slow waves and forests that hadn't seen billboards in decades. They spoke little, both lost in thought, the crate in the back humming faintly with hollow trees' now familiar warmth. Every now and then, Micah would rest his palm against the window, as if listening for something far away. It was mid-afternoon when they reached the place, a weathered train station long since abandoned, its paint peeled and the sign faded. Marion Ridge. Grass grew between the tracks now. Benches were cracked and half sunken into the soil. No one had waited here in years. "This is it," Micah said, stepping out first. Elon followed, looking around. There was a quiet here that didn't feel empty. It felt patient, like the earth was waiting to be remembered. They carried the grow to the heart of the platform, an old stone circle that once held a timetable display. Now, it would hold something different. Something meant not to speak, but to receive. Micah knelt beside the base and opened the crate. The grow inside looked like the others, wooden pulsing, carved with gentle grooves that evoked both roots and ribs, but felt heavier somehow. More still. Together they placed it. No speech, no activation sequence, no press of a button, just a shared breath, a quiet nod, and the sound of wind moving through trees like a whispered song. Then, as Micah stepped back, the orb glowed, dimly at first, then slowly brightening, not to full shine, but to something gentler, a kind of soft presence, like the station was breathing again for the first time in years. Elon sat on one of the broken benches and looked across the field. "Do you think anyone will come?" Micah sat beside him. "Not yet. And when they do, they won't know why they came," Micah said, "but they'll leave a little more whole." They stayed until sunset, and when they finally stood to leave, neither one looked back. Somewhere down the road, Elon asked the question he hadn't dared speak before. "What happens when I go back?" Micah didn't answer right away. He was watching the sky. "You won't be going back," he said. "You'll be going forward, but different now." "To what?" Micah turned. "Whatever listens to you the way you've learned to listen to others." Elon stared ahead, road unspooling like a quiet invitation. When they returned to the town, it was dark. Most houses had their porch lights on. The breeze carried the scent of something baking. Someone had tied a note to the gate in front of Laney's house. It said only, "Thank you for guarding the quiet." And life somehow just continued. Not loudly, not with ceremony, but with warmth, with presence. Over the next few days, Elon helped Hank repair a fence, taught some local kids how to solder safely, joined a chess game at the library that lasted 4 days. Micah finished another sketchbook. And on a Sunday morning, something remarkable happened. A woman arrived in town with her young daughter. She didn't say much, only that she had heard whispers. She sat in front of the grow at the church for half an hour, hand resting gently on the surface. The daughter didn't fidget. She just sat in her mother's lap and watched the light pulse. Later, when they left, the mother handed Elon a sealed envelope. Inside a photo, it was her daughter, eyes closed, head against the orb, and a single sentence handwritten on the back. "She hasn't spoken since the accident, but she sang a little when we got back in the car." Elon showed it to Micah, who nodded once and went back to sanding the edge of the 13th grow. They didn't speak of it again. They didn't need to. because this was never about saving the world. It was about reminding the world it still knew how to feel. The morning after the 12th grow was planted, Elon sat on the edge of Laney's porch with a quiet heaviness in his chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't exhaustion. It was weight, the kind that comes not from burden, but from meaning. Everything felt quieter now, slower, not because the world outside had changed, but because he had. Inside, Laney was humming as she watered her plants. Micah was already out in the garage, the rhythmic sound of sanding coming through the open window. A new notebook sat beside Elon on the steps, its first page still blank. He didn't open it. He just looked at it for a long time, thinking. That afternoon, a letter arrived addressed simply to the boy who listens and the man who stayed. Inside was a photograph of a small library in a remote desert town. Cracked adobe walls, a hand-painted sign, one open window. A note was scrawled on the back. We don't have much, just stories and silence. But it's the kind of silence that would hold something sacred if given the chance. Micah read it once, then again, then nodded. That's the next one, he said. But Elon wasn't looking at the photo anymore. He was staring at the corner of the porch where a child's toy sat abandoned, a small red truck with one wheel missing. Something about it stopped him. Not yet, he said. Micah blinked. Why? Because we haven't built yours. Micah tilted his head. What do you mean? I've built all of them. Elon turned to face him fully. Not for you. Micah was quiet. He looked down at his hands, hands that had carved, soldered, drawn, designed, but rarely received. Why would I need one? Because you've given yourself to everyone else, Elon said. And I don't think anyone's made space for you. Micah didn't respond, and that's when Elon stood. Come on, we're going to build it. They walked out to the garage together, though this time it felt different. Elon didn't touch the tools right away. He didn't ask Micah for plans or drawings. He just stood at the center of the room and said, what does it feel like when you're alone and finally let yourself be you? Micah hesitated. Then slowly he closed his eyes. It feels like wind underwater, he said. Like remembering a song you've never heard. Elon nodded. Then that's where we start. Over the next 2 days, they worked side by side. No visitors. No sketches shared. No progress explained. This grow wouldn't be shipped. It wouldn't be sent to a hospital or park or train station. It would live in a small wooden room at the back of Laney's house, beside the bookshelf Micah used to sit in front of when he was 5, pretending the cookbooks were star maps. The gross shell was carved not with leaves or waves, but with spiral patterns based on Micah's own thumbprint, scanned and etched into the grain. Inside, the core was calibrated differently. It didn't pulse. It listened in complete silence. It held stillness. And when they finished, Elon stepped back and said, now sit with it. Micah did. He placed both hands on either side of the orb, closed his eyes, and breathed. The room held still. So still, in fact, that even the air seemed to respect the moment. Minutes passed. Then the faintest flicker of light warmed the base. Not bright, not rhythmic, just there. When Micah opened his eyes, his face had changed. Less guarded, more held. And Elon, who had spent his life building for millions, had never felt more successful than he did watching that single child simply be seen. That evening, after dinner, Micah handed Elon a folded paper. It was a sketch, a new hollow tree, but this one wasn't for the clinic, or the school, or even the forest. It was a bench, with a soft orb beneath it, hidden, gentle, and at the base, carved into wood, a sentence. You don't need to be okay to sit here. Elon traced the words with his thumb. Let's build it, he said, but Micah shook his head. You will. Elon looked up. Micah just smiled. You've listened enough. Now you remember. Spring arrived without fanfare. The cherry trees near the church bloomed early. The creek ran faster, carrying with it petals, rain, and time. And in the softest way imaginable, the town changed once again. It wasn't a change of skyline or population or commerce. It was tone. The library stayed open later, not because of demand, but because more people came to read quietly together. The school carved out 10 minutes a day for Hollow Time, a name the children came up with themselves. And Dr. Marin began prescribing not pills, but pauses. "Go sit with the one in the garden," she'd say. "Let it know what hurts." And the people did, and it helped. Micah had grown taller. His voice, still soft, carried more weight. Not because it grew louder, but because he needed to speak less. His presence had become its own kind of language. Elon stayed longer than he ever meant to. What had begun as a detour had become something else entirely, a route. He helped the high school science teacher design a new curriculum based around feeling as a form of data. He quietly funded the repair of the abandoned music barn's roof. He even built a small greenhouse behind Lainey's house, where Micah started growing lavender, thyme, and an entire row of mint for when people need to calm down. But one morning, as the wind shifted and the scent of pine blew in through the kitchen window, Micah looked up from his tea and said, simply, "It's time." Elon didn't ask what he meant, because he already knew. That afternoon, they walked to the bench, the one Elon had built himself, just as Micah had sketched it. It sat beneath a tree by the edge of town, where the road curved gently toward the horizon. The grove beneath the bench pulsed softly, a hidden heartbeat, a sacred hum, and carved into the wood, clear and patient. "You don't need to be okay to sit here." Elon rested his hand on the wood. "You're leaving," Micah said. Elon nodded. Micah looked out over the fields. "Will you build more?" "I think so," Elon replied, "but only when I find a place that knows how to listen." They sat in silence for a long while, not sad, just complete. Lainey joined them later with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and 3 glass bottles of old-fashioned root beer. They ate without talking, elbows brushing, the breeze tugging gently at their sleeves. As the sun began to fall behind the trees, Elon stood. Micah stood too. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Micah reached into his backpack and handed Elon something, a new notebook. On the first page, a single sentence: "Wherever you go, build with breath." Elon nodded, emotion swelling in his throat. Then he turned, walked down the dirt road, and didn't look back until he reached the bend. When he did, he saw them both, Lainey and Micah, still sitting at the bench, still glowing, still listening, and then he was gone. But Hollow Tree wasn't. It grew, quietly, slowly, in towns where people whispered instead of shouted, in hospitals where grief needed company, in shelters and chapels and libraries and homes, not with press releases, but with presence, not with funding, but with feeling. And wherever it went, people sat and breathed and remembered how to speak without words, to cry without shame, to be seen even in silence. Hollow Tree didn't change the world. It reminded the world it still had a heart. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story touched you in any way, we'd love to know where in the world you watched it from. Please share your city in the comments.